for the talk. We like the choir. Well, all of you, I'm sure, have heard of a guy named Doubting Thomas. After Jesus' resurrection from the dead, although other disciples told him that they had seen Christ alive and well with their own eyes, Thomas remained unconvinced. And when Jesus finally did appear to Thomas, you remember what happened? Jesus said, "Hey, check it out. The nail scars in my hands and feet, the wound in my side. See for yourself." Today, I bet more than a few of you have a bit of that Doubting Thomas quality in you. Maybe you're kind of skeptical by nature. You don't believe everything that you read online or see on television. You want proof of things. One time I was talking to a person that was kind of new coming to the church, and he said, I look around the church and I see people who have so much faith. I sometimes feel like I don't fit in. He said, I'd like to say that I believe everything I hear. I wish I didn't have doubts. He said, I'm having a hard time accepting everything on blind faith. And that got me thinking about how a lot of people tend to think that doubt is the opposite of faith, which it's not. The opposite of faith is unbelief. There's a big difference between doubt and unbelief. Unbelief is to come to a conclusion that something is definitely untrue. Doubt is to be uncertain, undecided, sort of ambivalent. In other words, to doubt means you haven't come squarely down on the side of belief or unbelief. You're just not sure. Does it surprise you if I say that a person can be a true, genuine Christian with lots of faith in God, in the Bible, and in Jesus, and yet still has some doubts, some uncertainties about particular aspects of faith? In John chapter 7, John the Baptist is struggling with doubt. Now, he's a prophet. He's a great man of God, and yet he's still a human. And he has some questions regarding, is Jesus really the long-awaited Messiah? Now, here's a guy who has spent the last couple of years traveling throughout Israel preaching that Jesus is indeed the long-awaited Messiah. That was his whole message. But even he was having doubts. He wasn't so sure. So how do you think Jesus responded to John's doubts and skepticism? Does he give him a stern lecturing? Does he condemn him or belittle him because of his doubt? No, if you'll read in Luke chapter 7 sometime, you'll see that Jesus sent word to John the Baptist instructing the messengers to tell him what they had seen with their own eyes. The sick had been healed, lame walking, blind received their sight. Jesus was trying to bolster John's faith. You think, but didn't John's doubt affect Jesus' opinion of him? Well, apparently not, because in Luke chapter 7:28, Jesus says, I tell you, among those born of women, which is pretty much everybody, among those born of women, there is none greater than John the Baptist. However, I think a lot of people today see churches as having an unspoken rule of, doubters not welcome. No questions allowed. Well, as you know, that's not the way we are around here. We encourage you to ask your questions, to explore your doubts, to wrestle with important spiritual issues. It's okay to be ambivalent or undecided about certain things that you haven't come to a point of resolve yet, as long as you are doing your due diligence. Well, we're in the third week of a series in which we're investigating whether the Christian faith is based on fact or fiction. What do you think? I bet you have an opinion. Is Christianity based on legend, mythology, and wishful thinking? Or is it based on historical facts? And if so, is there enough compelling evidence to tip the scales of probability to where an objective person could be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt? Last week we talked about the overwhelming mountain of evidence that points to the accuracy and historical credibility and reliability of the Bible. We said that it is without question the best single documented piece of ancient literature there is. And if you weren't here, the one in the Bible is really important. And so if you go on YouTube and just type in the Seeker Church, you'll find it, and you can find the talk that says, isn't the Bible filled with myths and mistakes, and listen to it. Today we're talking about, is there really a God out there? Is there really a God? And if so, is there some sort of evidence or proof that would substantiate the existence of God? Now, what Gallup polls and other studies tell us is that the vast majority of Americans still do believe in God, somewhere around 90%. Now, some just say a higher power, but just believing that there is a God of some kind out there. But you know, if you pressed a lot of people these days, I think they would have a pretty hard time articulating why they believe in God. I wonder if you could explain or defend your position to someone who asked you, do you believe in God? If you said yes or no, could you adequately articulate why you believe in God or don't believe in God? Now, there are many terms that people sometimes confuse with atheism. For instance, secularism. However, secularism is not the belief that there is no God, but simply the excluding of spiritual matters and religion from public affairs. That's secularism. Then there's pluralism, which is the viewpoint that all beliefs, all religions are equally valid. And that's what we're going to talk about next week with aren't all religions basically the same? Then there's relativism, that the only absolute truth in life is that there is no absolute truth. Then there's existentialism, that each person could just kind of define for themselves what truth and reality are. There's agnosticism, the belief that you can neither prove or disprove the existence of God, and so you just can't know either way. That's agnosticism. And then finally, atheism, the belief that there is not a God. Now, the latest polls and studies reveal that today in our country, 2.6% of Americans are atheists, and about 6% are agnostics. Another 8.4% say they don't really have any beliefs or ties to religion. They might believe there's a God in sort of a vague way, but they don't have any tie to any particular religion. So altogether, 17% of Americans fit into the no religion category. 6% of which say they're agnostic. They're just not sure. They don't think that you can know if there's a God. And there are 2.6% who believe there isn't a God. Worldwide today, 3.5% of people around the world are atheists. Now, one thing most people tend to do is to criticize those who are different from themselves. Like anytime I see somebody wearing a University of Texas shirt, I immediately don't like them. Now, I don't have to know anything about them, like this guy. I don't know anything. Why would I not like this guy? But, you know, he's wearing the Texas shirt, among other things. But if he just had the Texas shirt alone, I just have this preconceived. I just don't like him. I just don't, you know, that fact alone makes me not like them. No. You know, maybe you have people that you've known that, or you meet that are atheists. And sometimes you meet someone and you find out they're an atheist, and maybe subconsciously, or maybe not even subconsciously, it immediately begins to change or discolor your feelings about them. Just as there are other people, the moment they find out that you're a Christian, it immediately changes and discolors how they view you. Now, this dynamic is not really helpful in how we treat people. So let me give you a few simple tips when you see and interact with an atheist in your life. Number one, avoid stereotyping. All atheists are not God-hating, anti-Christian, obnoxious, morally depraved people. A lot of atheists are very nice, thoughtful, smart, honest, and caring people. Number two, don't say that atheism is a religion or their religion. Religion is usually defined as including a belief in a deity of some kind, and it just alienates and angers people when you insist that atheism is their religion. Number three, most atheists have really thought out why they have come to the conclusion that there is no God. Now, some people might just go, you believe in God? Nah, and without having, yeah, but most atheists, I think, have really given it some considerable thought. So if you're going to discuss that issue with them, you need to make sure that you are adequately prepared to explain why you do believe there's a God, because they're probably going to be adequately prepared to tell you why they don't. Number four, arguing rarely does any good in this matter. Now, reasoning, if it can be done calmly and respectfully, is fine. But put-downs and sarcasm will do a lot more harm than good. Like, there's this anti-atheism cartoon. Christians who go around, this route of attacking or belittling other, people's beliefs do more harm than good. Likewise with this guy. Do you think any Christian is going to defect to atheism after running into this guy with this sign? Probably not. In his book, Richard Dawkins declares that to raise a child in one's faith is tantamount to child abuse. Well, such inflammatory statements like that really don't change anybody's minds. On the other side, an atheist complained to a Christian that believers have all these special holidays. Christmas, Easter, Hanukkah, Yom Kippur, whatever. But atheists don't have any recognized holidays. And the Christian replied, no, sure, atheists have their own holiday, April 1st, April Fool's Day. Well, I'm going to guess that no atheist has ever converted to Christianity because of a joke like that. So there's all this back and forth. You know, Christians have done a lot of bad things down through the centuries. Christians have done some wonderful things. Atheists have done terrible things throughout the century. Atheists have done wonderful things. It's better to try to take the emotion out of it as much as possible, but certainly the sarcasm and criticism, it just doesn't do any good. So today I want to give you just an overview, a brief sampling of 4 classical arguments that have stood the test of time in building a convincing case for the existence of God. Now, we obviously don't have time to go into each of these in detail. If you want to write these 4 things down as we go through them and look them up further, you can do that. Let me start by explaining what is called the cosmological argument for the existence of God. The word cosmological comes from 2 Greek words. The New Testament was written in Greek also. One of which means logic or reason, and then the other part means world. Put the 2 together, and cosmological simply refers to the reason for the world, the logical or explanation behind the world. And this argument has 3 parts. First is the principle of what they call sufficient reason. You know, it doesn't take too keen of a sense of observation to look around and realize that things exist. There is matter, there are trees and water and people and stars and rocks and so forth. Those things exist. The principle of sufficient reason asks the question, why do these things exist? What is the sufficient reason for their existence? Now, use your imagination for a moment and try to think about, what if nothing existed? Would nothingness require an explanation? This is when the music for the Twilight Zone comes on. All right? Does nothingness need an explanation? Well, there wouldn't be anybody to explain it to, or to ask the question if nothing exists. But the split second something exists, anything, there's the need to answer the question, how did it come about, and what is the reason for its existence? The second part of the cosmological argument is, if we carefully observe all the things existing around us in our world, we conclude that all of it seems to be contingent, which means that it seems to be dependent upon something else for its existence. You know, fish cannot live without water. Plants need air. Animals need food, etc. Nothing we observe seems to be utterly independent, self-caused. Everything that we see in this world did not exist at one point and probably will not continue to exist forever. In addition, the second law of thermodynamics reminds us that everything in our universe is in a continual state of entropy, slowly deteriorating, including human beings. Compare your high school graduation picture to your current driver's license picture, and you just see, you know, we're all kind of going downhill. So this principle of contingency asserts that everything around us seems to be dependent on forces outside of itself for its existence. It's not self-created. And that leads to the big question, which is the third part of the cosmological argument. If all that exists is indeed contingent and in a gradual state of decline or deterioration, who or what then is the explanation for the existence of these objects and beings? Now, I want to throw something out here, this part of the argument that may stretch some of us intellectually or mentally a little bit, but to help us understand this more clearly, I want to ask you to try to pull yourself out of our universe for a moment, just like pull yourself away from the universe in your mind, and then draw a circle around everything that exists in the universe. All the planets, people, galaxies, everything. Just draw a big circle around it. So everything in the universe is now located inside that circle that you drew. And we've already concluded that everything inside that circle is contingent. It's dependent upon other forces for its existence. It's slowly deteriorating and headed toward non-existence. The big question is, what caused all of this non-self-creating contingent stuff in that circle to exist in the first place? The answer must come from one of 2 places. The ultimate cause of everything inside that circle either had to come from inside the circle or outside the circle. What explanation makes the most sense to you? Well, if everything in the circle is already contingent, dependent, decaying, dying, how rational is it to think that the ultimate cause or the first cause of everything inside that circle to have come from inside the circle, which by definition is nothing is self-caused or independent? It doesn't make sense to think that the ultimate cause for everything inside that circle came from inside the circle itself. I think most people would conclude that the explanation for everything that exists inside that circle must come from where? Outside the circle. By definition, everything outside the circle must be non-contingent, not dependent on other things, not deteriorating, or it would be inside the circle. So everything outside the circle must be non-contingent, utterly independent, self-caused, which would make it unlimited, without beginning or end. Those kind of adjectives come kind of close to describing what we believe God is like. So for hundreds of years, people have studied and dissected and contemplated this cosmological argument for the existence of God, and have concluded it is a powerful and compelling intellectual argument pointing to the existence of an eternal, all-powerful, non-contingent being. I challenge you to try to poke holes in it. Go home, look it up on the internet, get the whole explanation, and see if you can poke holes in it. Now let's move to a second classical argument for the existence of God, and it's called the teleological argument, which points to the order or design of the world around us. It asks the questions, who or what is responsible for all of the incredible intricacies and the symmetry and the order and the coordination of all we see in this created world? A philosopher, William Paley, wrote, there is simply cannot be a design without a designer. That's his opinion. Teleological argument challenges that the familiar theory that all of what we see in existence came about by sheer chance. And you know that for centuries, humankind looked at the complexities and wonders of the created realms and simply assumed there must have been an intelligent designer behind it. It just seemed common sense. That supposition was basically unchallenged until the 18th century, when scientists began to hypothesize that the origins of the universe might be scientifically explainable. And of course, now in vogue is the Big Bang theory, which holds that a chance collision of floating gases in space set in motion a random series of events that over billions of years finally brought us to the complex state that we're in today. We talked about that in the first week of this series. You've all heard this theory. It's widely taught in educational institutions. And yet no scientist can adequately explain where did these mysterious gases come from in the first place. When people ask you about, where did God come from? And you say, well, he always existed. And they say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, you have to ask them, well, where did these mysterious gases come from? Or whatever collided, or whatever happened, where did that come from? And so, it's just been something that people have struggled with. The teleological argument basically says that the random chance explanation for the complexity and design and order of this universe just seems mathematically unlikely. Wherever there is a design or structure or order or reason or logic, it forces you to acknowledge that some intelligent being must have been behind in some way that design or order or structure. This afternoon, go home and take off the back of your computer or television set and look inside there. There would be hundreds of tiny little circuits and connections and wires and so forth. Now, if you look at it real carefully and ask yourself, was this designed and assembled by an intelligent human being, or did it likely come about as when a random explosion happened in a metal factory? I mean, I'm not trying to be stupid, but just, while you're driving home, look on both sides of the street at the homes around you and ask yourself, were these homes designed by an intelligent designer, or were they a result of a random tornado in a forest somewhere and this is what came? Obviously, the more complex the design of anything, the more difficult it is to believe that it came about by accident. Living organisms like plants and animals and human beings are actually much more complex than televisions or houses or even computers. So if you consider all this, and the evidence points toward being a designer behind the world's design, then you'll have a new appreciation for the teleological argument for the existence of God, which says that God alone, however he did it, we talked about the first week, however he did it, God alone can account for the marvels of this universe around us. Sheer chance could not have produced the complexities of life as we see it today. I mentioned this in the first week. Charles Darwin himself, in his book Origin of Species, wrote, to suppose that the eye, with so many working parts all together, could have formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. To me, it takes more faith to believe that by random chance, some accidental collision in space by things that created themselves to start with billions of years ago alone led up to the complexities, the design, to the meticulous order of the world that we see today. You know, who but an intelligent being could design a human eye? Or the navigational system of geese and ducks that fly thousands of miles only to arrive at the same place. The majestic mountain ranges, the exact rotation of the earth. We talked about 500 million, 80 miles a year in its rotation around the sun, never varies more than 1/100,000th of a second. It's hard to believe that happened by accident. As has been said by a lot of people, more faith is required to attribute the wonders of our world to the chance collision of floating gases to accept the possibility of an eternal, intelligent, all-powerful designer God. Next time you hold a little baby in your arms, just stare at it and say, could something this magnificent and complex have come about as a result of a cosmic explosion in space billions of years ago? You just have to weigh the evidence and decide which explanation is most plausible to you. All right, we touched on the cosmological argument, just a little bit on the teleological argument. Let's shift gears, and I want to mention what they call the moral argument for the existence of God. This argument asks the question, how does one account for the fact that human beings worldwide and throughout the centuries share a kind of moral code? In other words, if human beings simply evolved from primeval gases and so forth, or you know, amoebas or whatever, how does one account that in almost every culture on the planet, people value truth-telling over lying? People value kindness, as a general rule, over violence. People value loyalty over backstabbing, love over hate, justice over injustice. How do you explain that? I mean, back before there was even communication between cultures in the Middle East and Asia and America and whatever, there was no communication, right? But yet, when these different people groups discovered each other, they had a lot of the same values in life in common. How do you explain that? Could an explosion in space billions of years ago have stamped a moral code of values in the heart of people worldwide? How can such a remarkably consistent code of value in billions of individuals' lives happen by chance, by accident? The moral argument asserts that this moral code originated with a supreme moral being, who then stamped a basic sense of right and wrong in the heart and conscience of every human being. Finally, let me mention one last argument, and this one is of a more subjective nature, but a compelling argument nevertheless. The argument from personal experience. Author Ron Nash writes, religious experiences must be taken seriously as evidence of the existence of God, providing that the person making the experiential claim is widely known as a trustworthy person. What he's driving at is, billions of intelligent, well-adjusted, non-delusionary people all over the world since the beginning of, mankind or whatever, including presidents, chief justices, scientists, economists, psychologists, farmers, coaches, teachers, housewives, claim that they regularly experience a personal friendship with God. They say they feel loved by God. They say they feel the forgiveness of God, and that these things have had a profound impact on their lives. Billions of people have claimed that God has provided them strength and comfort. And again, these are not the sentiments of a bunch of deranged people in mental institutions, but intellectual, normal, stable, thinking human beings. Now, like most of you, I've had a few heartbreaking setbacks and losses in my life. I mean, I know what it's like to feel like the bottom just fell out. But I also know that in those times, I experienced personally, firsthand, the love and comfort and strength of God in my life. I don't think I was delusional. Could be. I don't think I was. And if someone said to me, come on, you're just saying that to make your face sound real or whatever, I could look them right in the eye. For me to say otherwise would be lying if I didn't say that this is what I experienced. Now, experience alone does not prove much of anything. But when Christians all around the world would gladly take polygraph tests to prove the reality of their undeniable personal experiences with God, how do you account for believers, billions around the world over the years, in every culture and every time throughout history, making these same claims? Are billions of people hallucinating and delusionary? Are they all lying? I'm certainly not denying that an occasional delusive or deceitful person manufactures religious experiences, maybe for evil purposes. Self-deluded, Jim Jones or David Koresh. But that should not discount the testimony of billions of high-integrity people who claim to have first-hand experiences of God in their life in a personal way. The argument from experience says that when you first carefully consider the cosmological argument for the existence of God, and then the teleological argument for the existence of God, and then consider that moral code in human beings, then you tack on the fact that billions of intelligent, non-delusionary people have claimed to have had a personal relationship with God. You got to put that on the scale too. And just as every jury finally has to come to a point of making a decision, someday you will stand accountable for what you have concluded about these evidences for the existence of God. So you have to ask yourself honestly, who or what created all of this contingent, all these contingent articles and objects and so forth that are inside that circle? You know, when you took yourself out of it, who or what created all that? Who or what designed the complex, systematic wonders of our world? Who or what stamped this moral code on the hearts of people around the globe? And what about the billions of Christians who claim to have had a personal relationship with God? How can all this be explained without acknowledging that the possibility, at least the possibility, that there is a God? An eternal, powerful, non-contingent creator God, master designer of the wonders of the world, including you and me, author of that moral code that is written on the hearts of every human being, capable of having a friendship with any of his creation, including you and me. I think the evidence for the existence of God is much more impressive than you'd be led to believe just living in our country today. I think there is certainly enough evidence to bring all of us to the point of believing that beyond a reasonable doubt, that there could be or there is a God. And I want to say to those of you who are already believers, you have no reason to be embarrassed or ever to shrink back from making it known that you believe in and have a personal relationship with God. Your faith is not based on, myths or folklore. Your faith is based on a strong, rational foundation and concrete evidences that we talked about last week of the Bible. For those of you who are not sure yet, well, this is the right place for you. Because this is a place where you can ask your questions, you can deal with your doubts, and be honest about it, and hopefully weigh all the evidences, and at some point come to a conclusion that you can live your life by, and that you can stake your eternal destiny. If there's an afterlife, well, then you're going to stake your eternal destiny on what you believe. So the stakes are pretty high. Let's pray, and we'll see you next week. Lord, I think all of us here sometimes wonder. We look up into a sky at night sometimes and just wonder, is this real? We're here, we know that, but could there really possibly be a God who somehow made all this and loves us and sent his son to die on the cross and Sometimes it just, Lord, remind us that to take you and everything else that we believe out of the equation, then what's the explanation makes less sense. And that there are concrete evidences. And that lead us to what we now believe. And that, God, we can feel confident and strong and secure that we're not just accepting these things on blind faith, but that there are reasons. And there's the evidence of Scripture that has stood the test of time. So, God, I pray that all of us would continue to be seekers, that we would ask honest questions about, our doubts, and to know that you're never angry with us, but instead you bring things into our lives that will enlighten us and bolster our faith. Lord, I'm thankful for this series to have a chance to talk about these important things. And many of us, especially young people here, are bombarded on a regular basis with the idea that these things are just made up. There's no reason to believe these things. We have to be naive and gullible to believe these things. And God, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be reminded that Christianity has stood the test of time for a lot of reasons. And it has not been disproven because of a lot of reasons. So God, I pray that you would increase our faith. You would help us to feel confident in what we believe and who we are and who you are. So pray, God, you'll go with us as we leave this place today and get out and live our lives this week, that we would be representatives of the kind of people that you want us to be. I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, you guys, thanks for coming out. We will see you next Sunday, final week of the series. Stuff like that.